The average American worker has less than $1,000 saved for retirement. Not $10,000, not $5,000, less than $1,000. Let that number sink in. $955. That's the median retirement savings for working Americans between the ages of 21 and 64. Less than most people spend on a single month of groceries. And here's the part that should disturb you even more. Most of those people aren't irresponsible. They're not blowing their paychecks on vacations and luxury cars. They're following the advice. They're doing what they were told to do. Save 10% of your income. That's the rule. That's the wisdom. That's what every personal finance article, every well-meaning parent, every basic budgeting guide has repeated for decades, and it's failing millions of Americans quietly, slowly, without warning, until it's too late to fix it. The problem isn't that people aren't saving. The problem is that they're saving the wrong amount and feeling good about it. That false sense of security is the most expensive financial mistake you can make. Because here's what nobody tells you about the 10% rule. It was never designed to be enough. It was designed to be a starting point. And somewhere along the way, a starting point became the finish line for an entire generation. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why that rule is broken and what the math actually says you should be doing instead. I've spent a long time studying why smart, hardworking people end up financially unprepared. Not because that they didn't try, because they followed rules that were never built for their reality. And what I found that keeps coming up over and over again, the people who struggle most in retirement aren't the ones who saved nothing. They're the ones who saved just enough to feel okay, just enough to stop asking questions, just enough to believe the rule was working. That's the trap. And most people won't see it until they're 58 years old, running the numbers for the first time, and realizing the math doesn't work. Some of what I'm about to share will contradict everything you've been told about saving money. Some of it will make you uncomfortable. That's not an accident. Comfort is exactly what got us into this problem. By the end of this, you'll understand more about how the 10% rule actually works, and why it doesn't, than most people learn in their entire lives. Because you stayed. You don't need to overhaul your entire financial life today, but you do need to understand the truth, because you can't fix a problem you don't know exists. Here's the first angle nobody talks about. The 10% rule didn't come from a government study. It didn't come from decades of rigorous financial research. It came from a simpler time, when pensions were common, when healthcare was cheap, when the average American could work 40 years at the same company and retire with a guaranteed monthly check for life. That world is gone. In 1980, 83% of private sector workers had a pension, a real pension, money that showed up automatically every month after retirement, no matter how long you lived. Today, that number is below 15%. The system that the 10% rule was built around has almost completely disappeared, and nobody updated the rule. Think about what that means for you personally. Your parents or grandparents saved 10% as a supplement. They had a pension doing the heavy lifting. They had Social Security designed to replace a meaningful portion of their income. The 10% was the cherry on top. For you, the 10% is often all there is. And here's where the math starts to fall apart. Completely. The 10% rule only works under a very specific set of conditions. You have to start saving in your mid-20s. You have to maintain consistent returns of around 10% annually. You have to retire at 65. And you have to live on significantly less than your current income in retirement. Change any one of those variables and the whole equation breaks. Let's talk about the starting age problem, because this is where most people get blindsided. If you start saving 10% of your income at 25, the math can work. Barely. But if you start at 35, which is far more common because your 20s are expensive, you don't just need to save a little more. You need to save between 16.5% and 19.8% of your income every single year just to reach the same retirement target. Nearly double. Just because you waited 10 years, and if you start at 45, the number jumps to over 30%. At 55, some projections put it above 65% of your income, which is mathematically impossible for most people to achieve. Here's a real scenario to make this concrete. Two people, same job, same $60,000 salary. Both follow the 10% rule religiously. Michael starts at 25. He contributes $6,000 a year for 40 years. At a 7% average annual return, he retires at 65 with approximately $1,197,000. Robert starts at 35. Same discipline, same $6,000 a year, Same 7% return, but he only has 30 years instead of 40. Robert retires with $567,000. Not because he did anything wrong, not because he was less disciplined, simply because life got in the way for 10 years. Student loans, a medical bill, a period of unemployment, and he started a decade later. The gap between them is $630,000 from the exact same rule, the exact same percentage, the exact same commitment. That gap isn't a personal failure, it's a math problem, and the 10% rule doesn't account for it. But that's not even the most alarming part of this story, because there's a number most people have never actually calculated, the number you actually need to retire, and how far 10% falls short of reaching it. Let's talk about a number that most Americans have never calculated for themselves. How much do you actually need to retire comfortably? Not survive, not scrape by. Comfortably. Maintaining something close to your current lifestyle. Traveling occasionally. Handling medical bills without panic. Not becoming a financial burden to your children. According to the most recent data, Americans believe they need $1.26 million to retire comfortably. That's the number people say when asked. $1.26 million. The median retirement savings of Americans who are actually at retirement age right now? $87,000, not $870,000. $87,000. The gap between what people think they need and what they actually have is $1,173,000. Over $1 million. And the 10% rule is a significant reason why that gap exists. Let's run the actual math on a real American household. The median household income in the United States is approximately $80,000 per year. 10% of that is $8,000 annually, $667 per month. That sounds reasonable. That sounds responsible. That sounds like it should be enough. Here's what it actually produces. If you start at 30 and invest $667 a month at a 7% average annual return until age 65, you retire with approximately $1,078,000. So technically, on paper, it works. Barely. If you start at exactly the right age, hit exactly the right returns, and never miss a contribution. But here's what that $1,078,000 actually means in retirement. Financial planners use what's called the 4% rule. You withdraw 4% of your savings per year to make the money last 30 years. 4% of $1,078,000 is $43,120 per year. That's $3,593 per month. You were living on $80,000 a year. Now you're living on $43,120. That's a 46% pay cut the moment you stop working. Add Social Security. The average monthly Social Security benefit right now is approximately $1,960 per month. So your total monthly retirement income is about $5,553. You were making $6,667 a month before retirement. Now you have $5,553. That's still a meaningful drop. And that assumes everything went perfectly. No market crashes, no job losses, no years where you had to pause contributions, no medical emergencies that drained the account. Now let's look at what happens to the majority of Americans who don't start at 30. The average age that Americans actually start consistently saving for retirement is closer to 37. Not 25, not 30. 37. At 37, saving $667 a month at 7% until 65 gives you approximately $643,000. The 4% rule gives you $25,720 a year, $2,143 a month. Add Social Security and you're at $4,103 per month total. You were living on $6,667 a month. You're now living on $4,103. That's a 38% reduction in your standard of living every single month for the rest of your life. And that's if you were disciplined. That's if you never touched the account. That's if the market cooperated. Here's the contrarian truth that makes people uncomfortable. The 10% rule was never meant to replace your full income in retirement. It was designed as a supplement to a pension system that barely exists anymore. The people who created this rule assumed you'd have 3 sources of retirement income: pension, Social Security, and personal savings. You're now expected to do with one what used to require 3. And nobody told you that when they handed you the rule. So what's the actual number? What percentage should you really be saving? Fidelity recommends 15% as the real minimum. Not 10, 15. And that's if you start early. The Motley Fool says the same. So does almost every independent financial planner who runs the actual math instead of repeating inherited wisdom. But here's the thing most people miss entirely, and this next angle might be the most important one in this entire video. Saving more isn't even the real problem. The real problem is that most people don't understand the difference between saving and investing. And that confusion alone could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's a question most people have never been asked. When you save your 10%, where exactly does it go? For millions of Americans, the answer is a savings account, a regular bank savings account, maybe a money market account, somewhere safe, somewhere accessible, somewhere that feels responsible. And that feeling of responsibility is quietly destroying their financial future. Because there is a massive life-altering difference between saving money and investing money. And the 10% rule never specifies which one you should be doing. It just says save. So most people do what feels safe. They put it in a savings account and call it done. Here's what that actually costs you. The average traditional savings account in America right now pays 0.46% annual interest. Not 4.6%. Not 4%. 0.46%. You put $10,000 in a regular savings account for an entire year and you earn $46. Meanwhile, inflation is running at roughly 2% to 3% annually, which means your money's sitting in that. Savings account isn't just not growing, it's losing purchasing power every single year. You're saving 10% and actively getting poorer. Let's put two people side by side to show what this actually means over time. Same age, same income. Both save exactly 10%, $500 a month, starting at age 30. Person A puts their $500 into a traditional savings account, earning 0.46% per year. Person B invests their $500 into a broad index fund, averaging 7% annual returns. After 35 years at age 65, Person A has approximately $219,000. They saved diligently for 35 years and have $219,000. Person B has approximately $946,000, nearly $1 million, from the exact same monthly contribution, the exact same discipline, the exact same 10%. The difference between them isn't income. It isn't intelligence. It isn't sacrifice. It's a single decision about where the money goes after it leaves their paycheck. That gap, $727,000, is the price of confusing saving with investing. And here's what makes this even more painful. Person A feels responsible. Person A followed the rule. Person A saved 10% every single month for 35 years and never missed a contribution. They did everything they were told to do, and they still end up with less than a quarter of what Person B has. The rule said save. It didn't say where. And that omission cost the average American hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now let's talk about the psychology behind why this happens. Because it's not stupidity. It's not laziness. There's a very specific reason why people choose the savings account over the investment account. It feels safer. The number only goes up. There's no volatility, no red days, no news headlines screaming that the market crashed 8% this week. The savings account is emotionally comfortable in a way that investing never quite is, but comfort in finance is almost always expensive. The market does go down, sometimes dramatically. In 2008, it dropped over 50%. In 2020, it dropped 34% in 33 days. Those drops are terrifying if you're watching them happen to your retirement account. But here's what every long-term investor knows that short-term thinkers don't. Every single one of those crashes recovered. Every one. The S&P 500 has never ended a 20-year period with a negative return. Not once in its entire history. The people who stayed invested through every crash, 2001, 2008, came out the other side wealthier than before. The people who moved to cash when it felt scary? They locked in their losses, they missed the recovery, and they paid an enormous price for the comfort of feeling safe during the storm. Saving protects you from emergencies. Investing builds your future. You need both. But you cannot build lasting wealth by saving alone, no matter what percentage of your income you set aside. The 10% rule never taught you that distinction, and it should have. But here's something even the investing conversation misses entirely, because even if you're investing, you're 10% in exactly the right places. There's a force working against you every single year that most people dramatically underestimate. Here's something worth understanding about the 10% rule. It was popularized in the 1980s, when the average American home cost $78,000. When a year of college tuition at a public university ran about $3,000, when healthcare was a fraction of what it costs today. The rule was built on a cost of living that no longer exists. Since 1980, housing costs have increased by over 600%. Healthcare costs have risen by more than 1,500%. College tuition has gone up over 1,200%. Meanwhile, wages have grown by roughly 260% in the same period. The expenses grew 4 to 6 times faster than the income. And the savings rule never adjusted. Think about what that means practically. In 1985, saving 10% of a $35,000 salary meant setting aside $3,500 a year. That $3,500 had real purchasing power, real weight. Today, saving 10% of a $60,000 salary means $6,000 a year. But that $6,000 buys significantly less future than $3,500 bought in 1985. Because everything that retirement actually cost has inflated dramatically. You're saving a bigger number but buying less security. And inflation doesn't stop when you retire. It follows you in. The $43,000 annual retirement income that feels adequate today will feel noticeably tighter in 10 years and genuinely painful in 20. Healthcare costs alone for an average retired couple now exceed $315,000 over the course of retirement. That single expense can consume years of savings that the 10% rule never accounted for. The world changed. The rule didn't. And the gap between them is where retirement dreams quietly go to die. Remember where we started. $955. That's the median retirement savings of the American worker. And now you understand exactly why that number exists. Not because people are irresponsible, because they followed a rule that was built for a different era, never updated for the real cost of living, and never taught the difference between saving and investing. The 10% rule isn't evil, it's just incomplete. And incomplete information, followed faithfully for decades, produces incomplete results. Here's what the math actually says you should do. Start with 15% as your real minimum, not 10. If you're starting after 35, push toward 20%. Invest it, not save it, in low-cost index funds inside tax-advantaged accounts like a Roth IRA or 401k, and increase that percentage every time your income grows. Not your lifestyle. Your savings rate. That's it. That's the whole correction. The person you are 5 years from now will be shaped entirely by the decisions you make today, not the decisions you plan to make, the ones you actually make. Starting now. You now know something most people will never stop to question. You know why the rule is broken. You know what the real numbers look like, and you know exactly what to do differently. Stop saving 10% and calling it enough. Start building something real. $955. That's where following the wrong rule for a lifetime ends up. You don't have to be that statistic. 15%. Invested, not saved. Started today, not someday. The rule was built for someone else's world. Build your own.